Hello and welcome everyone. I see we have some participants trickling in. Good afternoon. Gonna give us one more minute while we wait for people to join us. But for all those who are coming in, welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Kirsten and I am an educator here at the Newark Museum of Art, and it is my pleasure to host this iteration of Lunch and Learn. We are joined by a very special guest, Newark's own, the Newark Museum's past own, Adebunmi Gbadebo, who is a visual artist based here in Newark. Welcome, Bumi.
Hi, hey Kirsten.
So for those of you who are big fans of the Newark Museum of Art's makerspace, you may recognize Adebunmi. She used to be an educator with us at the museum, and now she's off to bigger and brighter things as a visual artist. So it's such a pleasure to have her back and talk to us about her art and her process.
It's like a reunion.
It is a little reunion. So for all my attendees, welcome again. If you have any questions throughout this presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A feature. There's also a chat feature. To my friends viewing on Facebook, welcome. We see you guys. Please feel free to use the comment section. We will try to get to all the questions at the end. Bumi is going to have a little presentation of her work with some visual aids for us, and then we'll have the opportunity to kind of chat with her and pick her brain about her artwork. So before I let Bumi take it away, I do want to introduce her properly to you all. So Adebunmi Gbadebo is a visual artist who creates sculptures, paintings, prints, and paper using human hair sourced from people of the African diaspora. Rejecting traditional art materials, Gbadebo saw hair as a means to center her people and their histories, essential to the narratives in her work. Born in New Jersey and based in Newark, Gbadebo gained recognition in 2015, exhibiting in her first solo exhibition at the Paul Robeson Gallery at Rutgers University, Newark, while earning a BFA at the School of Visual Arts in New York. Her exhibitions include Dhaka Art Summit in Bangladesh, I-54 Contemporary African Art Fair in London, Minneapolis Institute of Art, Untitled Art Fair in Miami, Shashama Miranda Quo Gallery, the Jacob Javits Convention Center, Morris Art Dodge Foundation, College of St. Elizabeth, amongst others. She's in the permanent collection at the Minneapolis Institute of Art and the Minnesota Museum of American Art, and has been written about in publications such as the New York Times, Huffington Post, Sydney Morning Herald, Arts Fate, Ocula, and Afropunk. Her residencies include Vermont Studio Center, Keating Foundry. She has been broadcast on BBC Newsday and Talk TV in Nigeria, and has given talks at the Museum of the African Diaspora, Spence School, and the Newark Museum of Art. She is currently represented by Claire Oliver Gallery in Harlem. That was a mouthful. Amazing accomplishments so early on into her career. So, Bumi, I'm going to let you take it away and tell us all about these wonderful things you've been up to.
Thank you, Kirsten, for the intro. So I'll just wait for the first slide. And thank you for having me. I saw Sonnet, by the way. Hi. Okay. All right. So I like to start here in my work when I talk about kind of my practice. And I start at this painting, Olympia, by Edward Manet, because this was the painting that I saw in an art history class at the School of Visual Arts that kind of shift everything for me. When I was in art school, in this particular art history class, at this point we came up on maybe 500 years of art history. And this was the first painting that had a Black figure in it. And when I saw this painting, you know, my professor described it as a radical painting. And I was like, it had to be because this Black figure. That was the only thing kind of radically different about all the paintings beforehand. Um, but no, and if you're art historian or artist or something, you would know that the controversy stems from the white figure, the woman, because she is a prostitute and she's looking directly at her audience, and she has her shoe kicked off and she has her hand clasped on her vagina. And my professor went on to talk about the white figure in this painting in great detail. He talked about the black cat, which you could see is barely noticeable. He talked in detail about the silk, the curtains, even the flowers, but barely spoke about the black figure in this painting. Um, and I guess being in the class, seeing how this woman, who was also very prominent, the only other figure in the painting, was ignored, even if she was present, um, kind of started my thinking about, I guess I started making the decision that I wanted to literally reject this history that has excluded, or even when we're present, they just totally ignore us. You could go to the next slide. And, you know, because I realized when you're studying art history, you start to really see that paintings refer to the paintings beforehand, right? So that Olympia was referring to this painting, Venus or Beano, that happened about 200 years prior. And so you start to see that because of the material paint, there's this embedded history that refers to the one before it. You could go to the next slide. Um, and even if, this painting by the same artist, Manet, even if I were to paint a figure, a black figure, so go to the next slide, please. Which we see like Kerry James Marshall also mimic the style of people lounging in this picnic style. We will probably analyze this painting to the one in the previous slide, even if it is steeped in this Black subjectivity. So because of this inherent history that's embedded in the material paint, in art history that is white centric, I made a decision that in order for me to really have a practice that's steep in a Black subjectivity, not only did I have to reject the history, but I had to reject its material, which was paint. And hair became my material. So for about a year, before I even made a first piece, I started doing a lot of research. This was kind of a really foundational book in kind of the grounding of understanding the history of Black hair. And I have like a little quote. I contacted the co-author, Lori Tharps, and asked her what she wanted her viewers to get from reading this book. And this book was also really important in my kind of beginning research using Black hair as a material, because it started in Africa. It started its history in Africa. So before the Atlantic slave trade. So it talked about Black people's relationship with our hair, spiritually, socially, culturally, politically, historically. And, with contacting the author, her response was this quote here. And I like to share this quote because I feel like if I could have a 2-sentence artist statement, this would be it. But I think what's key in this quote is that Lori Tharp says that our hair is our connection to our African culture. So I try using And our hair carries DNA. So it literally connects us to that space, to that land, to that culture, to that history. And I think about that a lot when I create a piece. You could go to the next slide. So the first piece I made after switching my material from, and I was a painter and a sculptor. Um, so the first piece I made shifting from, I guess, traditional means of making art to using black hair um, was this piece. It's called Dada, and it's locks by two individuals, Jasmine Holder and Charles Ellerby, and their hair just goes all the way up the wall, and you could see it even surpasses the track lights. So it's about 20 feet in height. Um, and I think about um, this verticality, especially as a method or a way of forcing the viewer to look up to black hair. I think a lot about how the work's installed. Um, and because another shift in my practice was um, working in abstraction, I use installation, form, scale, and also title as a way to invite the viewer into understanding what the context of the work. So one thing about Dada, um, there's kind of get a scale perspective. One the word Dada in art history is an art movement, and it was definitely a movement of questioning what can be art, what is art, what constitutes art. One of the more famous Dada art pieces is Fountain, where Marcel Duchamp takes a urinal and flips it upside down, kind of the question of what can be art. And I definitely feel that's rooted in my work. Kind of taking this black hair historically has not been deemed beautiful or worthy, and making it art. But then also Dada also speaks to the Yoruba definition of Dada, and in the Yoruba tribe, Dada means locked hair. And if a baby is born with locked hair, they're deemed as sacred and believed to bring blessings to their family. So I do this like kind of, one could say, like code switch, where I'm talking to these two audiences, kind of layering in these different meanings. Um, the next piece here is Am I Still Dreadful? Um, and this is definitely a piece where the person informed the process, which informed the title, which informed the history. So this here was donated by a woman named Andrea Johnson, who was my track coach. I had like a double life as a track athlete and a artist. Um, and for the majority of my life, her hair was in locks. And one day, instead of cutting off her locks, which is the more traditional way of removing locks out of your hair, she combed them out, which took her several months. And the hair in this piece is all the shed hair from that process. And because her identity to me was so steeped in her wearing locks for a majority of my life. But then I was given all this loose hair. I wanted to kind of honor the two forms, the loose hair and the locked hair. So I re-locked the hair through felting, the felting method. Um, and it kind of takes on this new locked form. And the piece kind of poses this question: now that I'm in this locked form, do you see me as dreadful? Am I still dreadful? Which speaks to the history of why we call locked hair in Black culture dreadlocks. Um, and in this country, the origin of dreadlocks comes from when Africans were on the bottom of slave ships and their hair would mat. Um, Slave traders started using the language. Look at their dreadful hair. So this piece kind of speaks to that history. Um, so before I get into like further works, I always get the question, how do you get your hair? Um, so I have two processes. Um, the first process is just directly a person will donate. They'll either see my work on social media or through a show or word of mouth, and they'll donate their hair. So when I collect the hair from a donation, for a lot of times it's by women, um, because women just aren't going to barbershops as frequently as men. So there's this interesting relationship I have with the hair because I know who it came from. I have a relationship with that person or not, but I could at least ask them and understand more about their relationship with their hair and why they cut it. So a lot of my donations come from women as opposed to, you go on the next slide. Oh, go to the next slide. Oh, that's just the image of kind of how all the donations kind of sit in my studio. As opposed to the barbershop, which is the second means of me getting my material, where you'll see men frequent those spaces. And it's interesting because my relationship is with the barber, not necessarily the customer on any given day. So the hair that I receive from that space becomes anonymous, and I have to start looking at the barbershop um, as a full space. Like, what does this shop mean in its community? Who, where is it located? Who frequents this space? The history of the barbershop, which is a very interesting one. Um, yeah, and it's interesting because I'm also starting to see a lot of women barbers as I like build more relationships with barbershops. So here, these are the two kind of ways I collect hair. In this piece, Black Gold is here from a barbershop. Again, because that hair is anonymous, I think kind of the just density of how much hair is in this piece speaks to um, just this overall look at that barbershop space. And this is hair that's sewn to canvas. Sewing, especially in a lot of my earlier pieces, was kind of my vocabulary of speaking of this kind of meditative state, um, which also kind of refers to even the process of one who may get their hair done and that care and that kind of monotony of just um, doing one's hair. Here's just another kind of view. This next piece is called Untitled 15, and it's a 30-foot line, so it starts from the ceiling and it kind of cascades out to the floor. And I think this was like the first shift in my practice where I was starting to occupy space. When I went to SBA, I was the only Black student in my graduating class. So I became really hyper aware of my Blackness. Sometimes I refer to it as my Zora Neale Hurston or my Glenn Ligon um, time. The quote, "I feel most colored when thrown against a sharp white background." So because of kind of this hyper awareness of self, um, my kind of shift or shift to occupy more physical space and to kind of get the work off of the wall was a way of literally taking up white space, taking up this space. And also because the work is now um, kind of inside of the space and off of the wall, it becomes a little bit more intrusive and also forces the audience to navigate around it differently. And this piece was collected by um, maybe about six lines of women. So this whole piece, and it's the only piece with my hair in it, and my mother. It's like a grandmother, her daughter, her grandchildren, and it's five lines of women that make up this piece. Another kind of example, this piece in between, and also kind of experimenting with process. I mean, I think all the works experiment with process because they kind of call for different means of creation, although the consistency is the material. But this piece was built with armature, and then the hair was actually hand sewn to the armature. And there was a kind of learning curve. How do you sew through something that doesn't have a backing? Um, so the inside of this kind of sphere shape is solid, and then the outside still maintains its natural um, kind of properties and texture. Um, Also talking about experimentation, and I think kind of the pillars of my practice are experimentation, research slash history, and process. So I think all of that went into this work. And especially because I was getting a lot of donations from people that were coming with stories about their family history, and very much also thinking about how our hair carries history and information. I started this series called History Paper Ancestor Portraits, where I was silk screening images of my ancestors on top of hair. Some of the portraits are my ancestors on top of families' hair. So it's kind of this double history. And it's also a double history or a double portrait when you think of the information that's printed on top and then the information that's within the sheet that is printed on. Um, so this is my great grandmother. Next slide. Um, my great uncle, my grandparents, and my great great grandmother. Kind of a close up. And, this was a process to figure out how do you make hair a sheet of paper. Um, but I was interested in this kind of idea of archiving, right? So if there's information within the sheet, within the hair, and you make it into a sheet, you're essentially creating archive. Um, and that kind of led me. Also, I think another significant component about those ancestor portraits, it was the first kind of example in my practice where it involved representation. Um, and I guess from there, I started looking at representation and research as the starting point of legible information. And from there, the work becomes abstracted. So, um, speaking to that, I started doing this series called True Blue 18th Hole, where for this installation, I was looking at True Blue Plantation in Pawleys Island, which is located in South Carolina, and it was the largest indigo and rice plantation in the country. It produced an average of 700,000 pounds of rice per year, all produced through human labor, um, slave labor. And that plantation presently, currently today, is True Blue Golf Club. So that space is like kind of this other white space of leisure. Um, so the sheets start off with black hair and cotton, and I use the traditional couching method to form the sheet. And on top of that, it gets layered hair dye, indigo, denim, and then kind of the last addition are these documents. So here you have like kind of the mirror image of the original document, which is, you could see it says True Blue Plantation, detail and grading and shaping plans for hole number 14. So with kind of digging deeper into this land, this space, I found out that I found the archive of the architect who converted the plantation into a golf club, and these are his drawings. So that's kind of the last layer, and I use layering as a way of abstracting kind of this legible information. Another document I found was um, a will from one of the enslavers of True Blue Plantation in Polly Island, um, where he lists his human property by their name, their age, and their role on the land. So you could see some say like workwoman or ditcher or prime hand, which meant they were responsible for the primary work on that plantation. And at the bottom of the 185 names that um, George Polly, who was the enslaver, he lists their price, which was $2,000 per person, for a total of $370,000 for 185 enslaved people. Another, another detail of Michael Strands was the architect, and he was actually known as the one of the top golf architects in America. And True Blue Plantation was his first solo uh, project. So you see like the trees from his watercolor drawing are kind of extracted, and I placed them at the bottom of the sheet. And just some other details. And another installation shot. And I'm currently now, I have a show tomorrow actually. Introduced another True Blue plantation, also in South Carolina, but this one connected to my family history. My family, a lot of my ancestors are still buried on that land, which is True Blue Cemetery. So for the show I'm having tomorrow, I'll be looking at True Blue Plantation, that's now the golf club, and True Blue Plantation, where my family is buried, and kind of comparing and contrasting these spaces. It's interesting because on True Blue, that's the golf club, there's this kind of reality that there's like a simultaneous erasure and preservation that's happening, right? There is a preservation. It's very intentional that they kept the title of the plantation in the golf club, kind of maintaining that history. But at the same time, because it's a golf club, there's entire history. The trauma on that land has been erased. And then the True Blue plantation where my family is buried on, there's a erasure happening because nature is taking over. So I was able to visit that True Blue plantation in Fort Mont, which now grows cotton. Um, and the land is just overtaken by just nature that is kind of erasing a lot of that information. And I have family that led by my cousin Jackie Whitmore, who's been doing a lot of um, work on preserving, getting historical markers um, in the land to kind of preserve the history and keep our connection to that land. Just another installation shot and kind of for scale. And wait, can you go back real quick? Sorry. I do implement like indigo dyeing in some of the sheets as a way of also kind of reaching back to these traditions that we, before the slave trade, our relationship to indigo and even rice was a long history. Um, so I use the process of indigo dyeing as a way of almost like tapping into memory. And it also speaks to how the slave traders went specifically to those countries like Guinea and Sierra Leone and Gambia, where they had a history of indigo dyeing, and stole those Africans from those lands so that they could transfer their knowledge to the plantations in South Carolina and Georgia. And I think that's really important to note, because if you have a system that is rooted in dehumanizing people and saying they have no history and culture, they're not even human, then how do you rely on their history, their culture, and their knowledge to kind of create your empire? It's a kind of contradictory kind of point. Yeah. And I guess just to finish, I am moving into again sculpture again. Um, so this is like my vessel series that I'll be exploring more, and it starts off as a sheet, um, and it's kind of formed into a bowl. So I'll be exploring this vessel series through hair, and also creating vessels using the red clay, the dirt from these plantations, and making ceramics with them. So.
Thank you so much for that presentation. It was such a joy to experience your art and kind of hear about your process and all the research that goes into it. So a lot of people are asking questions and are want to know more, which is fantastic. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your upcoming show? You mentioned that tomorrow your show is opening and it will be on view at the Claire Oliver Gallery in Harlem through November. And I want you to tell us a little bit about the title, because you said that title and the language is really important for your work. So tell us about your show's title and the significance of it.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So the title of the show is called Dilemma of Inheritance, and it's actually like a line taken from a full statement that Ta-Nehisi Coates gave at the HR 40 hearing on reparations. I think it was last year, at the end of last year. And of course, he's making a statement about the need for reparations in this country, but also more specifically talking about not only did we have not only did we have slavery in this country, cattle slavery for 400 years, but the legacy of that and the extended to this day, past emancipation. So a dilemma of inheritance. And in the quote, he speaks on, I think the quote ends with, we cannot think about America without thinking about the inheritance of slavery. And So it just really struck me, because I think a lot about the things that are inherited, or the dilemma of that inheritance. So thinking about, kind of like I mentioned, like the inheritance of us using these crops like indigo and rice, and how that was taken, how we brought that knowledge and history with us. The dilemma of inheritance, when you look at the lands that was stripped um, from the original indigenous people. You know, True Blue Plantation in Fort Mont. That land was was belonged to the Congaree tribe. So the dilemma that they don't have that inheritance. Thinking about the wealth that was built um, on be on these indigo plantations, and how currently we still benefit from that wealth. Um, so I think the work in the show and how I thought about the creations of every piece that will be in the show, that idea of inheritance, um, True Blue Plantation to True Blue Golf Club, it means something that they kept the name. So all these ways that history um, and wealth and process, and even how I deal with process, working with blue, working with indigo, it's all this kind of and speaks to this idea of inheritance. Um, so yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking.
No, I love it. It's so layered between all the archival documents you use and the language, and also just the way you make the work and put it on the wall and make us have to interact with it. Like you said, like one of the things that we have spoken about is like you like the play on people want to touch it, and there's this history of white people just touching black hair unprompted and without consent. So like it's artwork and you're not supposed to touch it, but it's also hair, and I don't know, it's there's so many things at play here with your work, which is why it's we could talk forever.
Yeah.
So
And
we
I
do have,
kind and I kind of like to play with that tension of especially a lot of white audiences that feel the need to like touch the hair. Um, so make trying to like how it invades space or playing with density. In my black gold piece, I actually place razor blades. When I get the barbershop donations, a lot of times the barbers throw their dull blades in the donation bag, and I keep that in the hair as a way of like of cautioning people not to touch. But I like that tension because I think it speaks to this larger kind of issue around people kind of feeling like they have authority over others.
great, thank you. So we do have a question. What inspired your transition from museum educator to artist?
Well, I don't. I mean, I know I left the Newark Museum as Kirsten's co-worker, um, but I do. I don't want to leave it completely. I think I really love art education. It was through actually the Newark Museum's art education programming that introduced art into my life. I started in the junior museum at the age of 3 at the Newark Museum. Um, I got to a point where it was becoming really hard to maintain um, like a studio practice and working at the Newark Museum as an educator. I also had 2 other jobs. Um, so I kind of just for now shifted into kind of dedicating all my time to my studio practice, especially because it's just a really grueling process, and it's a process that also requires a lot of time put into research. So all the work, especially this True Blue series, is really steeped in all the research about um, kind of these different periods of what the land is, what it used to be, um, and I really also because it is a history where the people that were exploited on that land, their stories are being erased. It's really important that I give my all to um, researching as thoroughly and getting the information as accurate as possible because through the art, I'm telling their story.
Thank you for that. I know just from a personal standpoint, it was really hard for you to try to, go all in, but we're so happy that you did. I mean, look at your work. It's on the wall right now in Minnesota, on the wall right next to like your heroes, which I can only imagine is the most surreal feeling in the world.
Yeah, I even recruited you to help me in the studio a few times. It was just becoming a lot.
It's just a testimony, I think, to the Newark art community and how it is a community and so giving with everyone, giving their literal body for your practice and their time and everything.
Yeah.
Um, which leads me to the next question. So it's kind of like what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Like, what really informs some of your projects? Is it more, like you said, this rich research, or is it more like experimenting with the material and not realizing the limitations or maybe the strengths of hair and how versatile it is?
Yeah. So I think the earlier works, and I made that shift from to hair in 2015, and I've been working with hair ever since. But I think the earlier works were maybe I was looking really at the hair as material. So thinking about the texture, the color, how I got the hair. Um, and that was kind of informing the process and how I wanted to move forward. Although Dada, my first piece, was really informed by history. That very um, vertical piece was speaking to this idea in a lot of West African cultures. There's a lot of reverence for your head, and there's a belief that your spirit is on your head because it's the closest thing to God. So I wanted to create something that literally went as far up to God or the heavens as possible. Um, and then also, like I said, this way to look up to Black hair. But I think in this True Blue series, the research comes first, um, and then the process. So the research informs the material, right? So because it's an indigo plantation, um, there's indigo, there's blue. Um, because there was rice grown on that land, all the images are printed on rice paper. Um, True Blue is now a cotton field. After the decline of the indigo, it's also a very toxic process. The life expectancy on the indigo plantation was about 7 years, but the cotton, and then the hair as a way of just referencing history and also referencing Black bodies and Black people and ourselves within this history, is informed by the hair. So the history informs the material, which informs the process.
Thank you. We have an interesting question from an anonymous attendee. What are your feelings about white people who lock their hair? Do you ever incorporate these objects into your work? Very interesting.
Um, I don't feel like I like hold the space to make judgments on how people wear their hair, um, even if they're white, um, because I think people should have full autonomy to do whatever they want with their hair, and I take that even into how I make work. I really try and make sure the work maintains full autonomy on like how you're going to view me. um, even when the work gets collected, the fact that this is work that you have to care for. You have to care for this Black hair because it may shed, it may get dry. um, and I guess to answer the kind of second half of that question, I do have locks by a white person. His name is Giovanni. He's Italian, and I got his locks when I was staying in Spain for a couple of months. Um, Now, have I done anything with them? No. And really, I don't know if I'll ever do anything with them, to be honest. I'm not necessarily, first off, white hair is very different from black hair. And I know I've done a lot of cool things with black hair, but it's really difficult for me to work with white hair because it doesn't have, it's not a texture that interlocks on itself. Um, and I'm not white, so I can't speak from that position of what it, what it feels like, what it is like, a history of that, um, and also because I am coming, like, the work is rooted in literally rejecting a white history, and it's material that has systematically kind of erased us. um, it's really important that my work is just rooted in our history. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And thank you for everyone for your questions and your kind wishes. We've got a lot of shout outs in the chat for you, Bumi. We do have a question from Cheryl. Hey, Cheryl. Do you provide care instructions for the works that are sold? I can imagine some registrars and conservators are looking at their work like, what do we do with this? So could you speak to a little bit about the more formal art keeping aspects of your work?
Yeah. So yeah, I like the sheets which are being like collected a lot. They have like minimal shedding, but I think that's a part of the process of what it does. It'll never like fully decompose. I'm using cotton base to form the sheet, and the cotton, um, you know, lasts for a long time. And even like hair, I think the misconception is that hair breaks down easily, but um, there's mummies with hair intact. Hair is lasts for a very long time. Um, and as people collect the work and institutions collect the work, I like the fact that there'll be whole um, museum departments that have to figure out and learn how to care for Black hair. Um, you know, um, and I think it's, like I said, it's a way where the hair kind of still maintains, or our bodies, right, still maintain our autonomy, and kind of always I try and like think of like how does the work kind of dictate how you navigate, how you care for it, how you look at it. Um, so yeah, I give like minimal kind of care instructions. The hairier the piece, just kind of more um, it requires a little bit more care and maintenance. Um,
Yeah, I like the fact that your work kind of subverts and like pokes at art history and the traditional canon, the fact that there wasn't Black representation and that now that there are whole museum departments dedicated to preserving Blackness and Black hair, I think it's so profound and touching, and it's like just a way to stick it, kind of. It's interesting the way that our trajectory is going to be a more inclusive and equitable practice. So we have time for one last question, and then I want to remind everyone ways that they can engage with your work. So I have a quote here from Rashid Johnson, and I think that it is kind of connected to your work, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this quote and how it resonates with you and your process. Okay. So Rashid Johnson says, "I think that you can discuss the complexity of one's experience without illustrating it in such a comprehensive and legible way." What are your thoughts on that? Because I know you spoke about how your work is abstract, and also you have all this layered history and philosophy. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Yeah, so like in the beginning, it wasn't just a shift in material, it was a shift going from representation to abstraction. I feel like Rashid Johnson is like getting to that kind of point of um, talking about, you know, it's like a quote. I feel like that's kind of talking about abstraction. And for me, one, black hair has so much information in it. Um, and in a like it's interesting because in a way it is representation, right? If someone shaves their head and gives me a part of them, that is literally them. um, I didn't need to still work in representation or make something that was immediately legible, because of what the material is, um, and like is meaning like what's in it, what it is physically, where it comes from. Um, I felt like it created a lot of space for me to play and work about in abstraction. And black hair is political, so like working with it through abstraction, um, um, also I think let the audience read the work and then the material, you know. Um, so I wasn't necessarily interested in creating things that were immediately legible. Like now, like I said, I start with legible information and archives and documents, but I like to play um, with the legibility through layering. So you see the color and then the texture, and then a little, whole number 14 or a cabin, but the layering, which is also kind of these different levels of entry points into the work, um, is how I kind of flirt between legibility and illegibility, abstraction and representation.
Thank you so much for that. I wish we could talk about your work forever. It's something that I know we do personally. I wish you all could join for our chats when we sit in Military Park, but it was nice to get to share with you today. Thank you so much for being here. I know a lot of you are asking, are you taking donations? Where can I see your work in person? Like, how can I connect with you? For everyone on Zoom, I've put some links into the chat for you. That way you can follow Bumi's Instagram. You've got her website, sign up for her newsletter, make an appointment at her gallery to see her work in person.
Yeah, that goes up tomorrow. Well, it's going up today, but it opens tomorrow.
Yes, so her solo show, her first solo show with her gallery, Claire Oliver Gallery, it is opening tomorrow, the 17th, and it will be on view through November 5th. You can make an appointment using the link that I mentioned that I dropped. Facebook, don't worry, I'll drop the links for you as well so that you can be engaged with us. Thank you again so much for being here, Bumi.
Yeah, it was so fun and also familiar.
I know our museum colleagues are like, we're so happy you're back together.
I know.
Too. I would be remiss if I didn't welcome everyone for our upcoming museum opportunities. I want to give a shout out to any educators out there. We have an educators open house on Saturday to discuss what the education department will be doing to accommodate your students in this pandemic world. So please find the information on the website. We also have programming for homeschooling families, after school programs, all that good stuff. And for my families out there, we have an upcoming community day on October 10th. It's Game On, and we will be having discussions around technology and games and art, and it's going to be such a blast. So that wraps it up for us. Bumi, it's been a pleasure as always.
A pleasure.
Thanks everyone so much for joining. Sign up to see her show, follow us on Instagram, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for logging in.